what we'll do is we'll post it online for you later on. Again, like the previous webinar, if you wanted to make any comments or add any questions into the questions section as we go along, then feel free to do so, and then at certain points during the presentation we'll stop and answer some of those questions or raise your comments. Again, like the first presentation, you know, nutrition has been highlighted as a really essential, important, fundamental aspect of nursing care. And again, lots of evidence to prove the fact that there's many, many patients out there in a whole variety of nursing settings with a whole variety of different issues who are malnourished. And hopefully you're going to spend a lot of your time as a student nurse and as a qualified nurse identifying who these people are. Okay, so there's different systems in place where we can make some good assessments and screen people and work out exactly who these people are who are malnourished. The worrying thing with a lot of the evidence was the fact that people come into hospital malnourished and then were going home from hospital even more malnourished when they came in. So hence a really important thing that we have to do to find out these people and help them. And some of the help we're going to give them assistance is going to be on a quite a small scale, but it can make obviously a massive impact on their intake. It's obviously be very important for their health.
No, the hospital menus are constantly under review. The hospitals are given 12p a day to feed patients. It might come up later, but there you go. But there is a lot of discussion again in Parliament and around improving hospital menus.
Okay, the objectives of this presentation will be to review a healthy diet for the general population, to consider the dietary needs of different population groups, to define what malnutrition is, and to identify patients and clients who are at risk of malnourishment that you're going to be coming into contact with. And very importantly, if we're identifying who these people are, what types of things are we doing to help to improve their nutritional status while they're under our care. It's an old adage, but one you'll be very aware of is the fact that you are what you eat. And again, people live their lives in a whole variety of ways now, which might mean they're in contact with lots of different food types, etc., which have a massive detrimental impact on their life. And it's a kind of a two-edged sword, really. With some patients you're going to be coming into contact with are very undernourished, and that's the big issue in their life, which you're going to obviously highlight and assess and try to find different solutions to and try to improve that. And maybe a lot of the patients that you're going to be coming into contact with are overnourished, and again, it would be very, very important to identify who those people are and work out maybe different types of solutions to help those people. Why is good nutrition important within healthcare? Obviously, from a patient's point of view, presumably they're going to be in a hospital setting or a care setting because they're going to require, they've got some kind of disease or some condition which they're going to require a certain amount of energy to improve their physical state. And again, you're going to be coming into contact with people who are at different stages of their life when they're still in states of growth, in which case then obviously good nutrition is very important in different parts of people's life when they're going through growth, so through childhood and adolescence. And again, through some of your care areas where people are having, just for example, certain types of operations, etc. Again, it'd be very, very important for the body to help to repair itself and to heal itself, to have a good nutrition to improve that state. And again, there's a big, strong correlation between poor nutrition, malnourishment, and an increased risk of having an infection, in which case then we can maybe try to reduce infection rates in different situations by improving people's nutritional state. And all of essential bodily functions happening within the body is going to be directly related to nutrition and oral intake. So there's various food groups which, again, I'm sure you're going to be very okay with based on your previous situations. So cereal, bread, potatoes come under the banner of carbohydrates, but within that as well there's various vitamins which people may have. So carbohydrates is one food group which people will take in. There'll be meats and alternatives, so things like proteins and various minerals and fats and vitamins that people have through their essential important food. Dairy products, so milk is going to be containing protein and calcium and fats and soluble fats, in which case then these different types of chemicals and elements will play an important part in various bodily functions. Fruit and vegetables, so another big group there, classed under carbohydrates but also containing a whole variety of vitamins and minerals and obviously an important fibre intake. Again, the way society is, a big issue that you're going to come into contact with is related to fatty types of foods and sugary types of foods which people are being exposed to, which again may have detrimental effects on people's health, which we'll come to in a little while. And the importance of water and fluid intake. So in many care areas people are very, very interested in trying to prevent malnourishment, but maybe some big issues in lots of places is dehydration, in which case then with the following presentation looking at fluid balance, the importance of sufficient amounts of water and fluid per patient per day is an essential thing to aid these bodily functions. Again, some of you may have been aware of this, and I'm sure in some of your previous studying you've been aware of the Eat Well plate, and the good and important part of this is that it's visual. So if we're giving advice to people and the advice would be certain amounts of types of fruit and vegetables, or you've got to increase or decrease your carbohydrate intake, etc., people may be getting confused about what those types of foods are and what kind of proportions is a healthy state to be. So you will see in various areas here information that people can have or you can supply to people just to help them to understand different proportions of the different food groups we've outlined that would be good for a healthy diet.
Okay, a lot of you seem to be getting into looking up how much it costs for prisons and also for health service. I know it says 12p a day. That's a local figure. It's interesting to see that because, as I said, it's been debated in Parliament and the NHS have decided that they want to do something about it, so things have been moving on, and I'm wondering if it might be one of these election campaigns that we see coming up. There is a separate budget between NHS and prison services, absolutely. Anyway, we move on.
So choosing a better diet, having a healthy diet, presumably most of us, all of us will know what a healthy diet is, what kind of foods would constitute good nutrition and which is poor nutrition, and there's recommendations that have been set giving people guidance on safe levels of these types of food groups. But it's also people have done studies into it as well to work out actually how much people are having of these food groups in reality. And obviously found some stark differences. So we look at things like fruit and vegetables. Again, hopefully most of you will have a basic understanding that 5 portions a day would be sufficient for somebody. But again, people might get very confused about what the 5 portions actually means. So be interested to see any comments about what if people have been in circumstances whereby they've tried to understand, or people have tried to understand what a portion of a vegetable is. It's not necessarily, what's the difference between a grape and a
Can you hear me? They've lost you.
Have they?
Yep. Well, someone's lost you. No, you're back. It's okay.
I'm back. That's right.
Momentarily movement.
That's
it's
right.
A portion 100 grams. Somebody's asking, is a portion 100 grams?
Right. So, lots of debate and lots of discussion about what a portion would be, and that would be something that you're going to want to start investigating, because that will be something that you will be mentioning, and you have to give some good examples about what a portion of grapes would be compared with, say, a portion of apple, etc. The key thing also with the portion sizes is that 5 is a kind of a minimum, where people seem to want to make 5 as a bit of a maximum in their life, but 5 should be at least 5. There's lots of information now saying that people should be working up towards 8. But again, it means the fact that when people have looked into this, that people are, as a general rule, eating less fruit and vegetables than they could be or should be. And the same with things like dietary fibre. So there's recommendations about how much dietary fibre people should have per day, but the evidence is showing that on average people are having less dietary fibre than they should do. But again, people might be confused about what dietary fibre is and what 18 grams of that is, in which case then that's where you're going to be using your skills to identify that for patients and give them good examples about exactly what that would be. Another important aspect is about salt. So it's a well-known fact that people are eating and digesting too much salt within their diet, and there's recommendations of 6 grams per day or less that people are having substantially more based on food, the salt that's within their food, and obviously adding salt to food as well as part of the cooking and eating. And obviously having an increased amount of salt and sodium within people's systems will again correlate quite nicely to various medical conditions. Having reduced amounts of saturated fat, but again people are overeating in the fat department. And things like sugar as well, so having too much sugar. So there's plenty of scope out there when you get into the care areas to offer people some good lifestyle advice and some good information about their diet and parts of their diet, and to be able to give some good examples about what grams are and certain types of fibre.
There's a lot of debate going on about 5 a day, 7 a day, 8 a day, what it is in different countries. It's quite interesting, isn't it? Because there is no necessary definitive. It hasn't been well researched. And, there you go. Somebody's actually Kirsty has raised about it's actually cheaper to eat convenience foods. So there's another, and also the hidden sugars that are in foods, which is very highly debated at the moment in press, and about lazy to cooking and that whole kind of social thing, and affecting it, and the whole sort of social shift to eating convenience foods and how that affects people. I heard on the news day before yesterday that 1 in 10 children starting school in Cornwall are obese. So there you go. Yeah, I agree. There's a good debate going on amongst about fruit and fresh produce, and is it cheaper, isn't it cheaper? Are we cooking it? There's always these things like, the Jamie Oliver saying children don't even know what carrots look like or where they come from and all that kind of thing. And there's been a lot in the news recently as well about low-income families using food banks and having, which means, they can't afford decent food. Okay.
Okay. When we're looking at nutrition through the lifespan, the important thing is the fact that for the groups of adults that you're going to be coming into contact with, the importance is offering them some healthy eating guidelines if you come into contact with them and you've raised some issues about their nutritional intake. But again, the changes can occur based on the person being ill. So again, with people with various medical conditions and either in acute or chronic states of illness, their intake is going to be altered, in which case then you'll have to then maybe seek some expert advice about increasing certain food groups to satisfy that person's requirements. Because people might be using a lot of energy through trying to combat disease and infection, etc., that you're going to be seeing. And also, as I said before, or people have debated the fact that many people you're going to come into contact with are going to be the elderly, for want of a better word, in which case then the energy requirements for that group might actually decrease over periods of time based on the fact that their metabolic rate is decreased and their physical exercise is decreased, in which case then the types of foods that might be encouraged with the elderly, for want of a better word, might actually be slightly different from maybe the adult groups that you're going to come into contact with. So various client groups you're going to see might have various requirements based on nothing as simple as their age, but also the physical conditions and medical conditions that they're going to be exposed to. Right, we're going to pause for a chat there, or can I have a quick look
We
at
are
some of
having
the
a chat.
comments
We
there
are
we can
looking.
take back?
Yeah. There's. I'm trying very fast to send out to everybody as much as I can on that. People are talking about, is eating healthy diet seen as priority in hospital? Good question. Yes, somebody is also sort of challenging what measures. My answer to that, Siobhan, is what measures are people actually using when they're measuring children in school? She was saying her daughter. I think you said your daughter. Anyway, your child was classed as overweight. She does quite a lot of fit, but she has the body mass. So it's interesting. I think these things, it's about metrics and measuring and what measures are used and what's sensational to be reported at the end of the day as well.
There's a good comment made there as well, a bit political, about whether we should put a tax on salt and fat and sugar within foods, and whether that might give a difference for people to change their behaviours.
Somebody's raised a point. They're talking about people being, we're not feeding people or looking at detailed nutritional needs on wards, but also mobility and fitness and health needs as well. There's another good point from Lindsay.
So it's a good comment as well from Jessica about a bowl full of certain types of cereals.
Yes.
I've got equivalent of about 12 spoonfuls of sugar in, which is about twice the daily requirement, and that's happening before 9 AM in the morning, based on everything else that somebody might eat during the course of the day. Excuse my coughing there. So what is malnutrition? So as I said earlier on, the areas that we're going to get involved in, and you're going to get involved in, and the sessions you're going to make, is going to mean the fact that some of your patients and some of your client group are going to be undernourished, which means the fact they've got a massive deficiency of energy and protein and other nutrients within their diet. It's obviously going to have a detrimental effect on their physical state and their medical state. But again, some of your patients you're going to come into contact with, they're going to be overnourished, in which case then they're going to be having an excess of nutrients, which again is going to cause issues such as obesity. And again, even with Florence Nightingale, hundreds of years ago, they were aware of the fact that there's thousands of patients who are starved annually in the midst of plenty from want of attention alone, which could make their food intake possible. So again, that does correlate with a lot of work that's been done, even going back as far as the 1970s, and they've repeated surveys again in the last few years or so, finding exactly the same results. That again, as I said before, people are coming into hospitals and nutrition is not very high on some people's agendas, which means the fact that people are malnourished in hospital or becoming malnourished in hospital, and people aren't identifying those people and helping those people, sometimes in very, very simple ways. Which means the fact that if you look at the data for the 1970s and for the last few years, again, in some groups it could be between 10, 30, 40% of certain groups of people coming into care settings are malnourished at any point in time. And that, again, that's going to include people with mental health issues, surgical patients, medical patients, patients having chemotherapy, etc., children. Every single category of patient you'll look at and investigate, you'll find there'll be big chunks of those people who are having issues with malnourishment. And unfortunately, again, things aren't happening always in hospitals and care settings to make improvements of that by not identifying who these people are. Some of the causes of malnourishment, an inability or reduced ability to eat. So for various problems that people might have, such as arthritis or fractures to their arms, or people who might have had a stroke, for instance, they might have a massive sudden inability to be able to eat. So again, the kind of care that person might need just might need some assistance or certain types of utensils to help that person. Again, there's many chronic medical conditions that can affect intake, such as things like Crohn's disease. So people might have inflammatory bowel conditions, that gives them episodes of diarrhea and vomiting and bleeding and nausea, etc. In which case then that could be a prime person who's going to have malnourishment. And again, people might have reduced mental capacity based on other acute situations they might come across, or chronic situations they might come across, and they may be confused for a whole variety of reasons in a whole variety of settings, which might just mean the fact that for that person at that point in time, nutrition won't be an important factor for them. Again, it could be things like social issues. So again, there's some data to show the fact that nowadays people are having real problems buying food, and again, there's record amounts of people who are accessing food banks around the country this time of year, trying to get some basic food requirements for themselves and their family. So lots of social issues that could be a big problem. And I said before, reduced absorptive capacity. So again, people may have different types of conditions where there's some kind of inflammation within the GI tract, which means the fact that the food that they're taking in won't be absorbed in the conventional sense. So again, things like ulcerative colitis, and also some patients who have conditions like diabetes as well can have certain conditions where, again, the food isn't being absorbed correctly, in which case then they're losing vitamins and certain types of fats, etc., which are very important for the individual. On a future day, in the skills laboratory, we'll be having a look at drugs and drug administration, etc. And a very important part of drug administration is to check about interactions that drugs might have, with nutrition and how it might affect nutrition. And there'll be a little booklet called a British National Formulary. There'll be something which you'll see out there in placement, and hopefully when you get involved with giving drugs out, you'll use a lot of. But we'll show you and make sure you understand the fact that some drugs you're giving patients for their medical conditions might have a detrimental effect on their ability to eat or their requirement to eat. And a good example of things could be things like antibiotics. So imagine someone comes into hospital with some sort of infection. They're starting a course of antibiotics. When you have a look at what the interactions and the problems with that type of antibiotic could be, it could cause diarrhea for that patient, or it could cause nausea or gastric upset, which again might make that person for a period of time not feel like eating very much. There's lots of causes of malnutrition that you're going to come across. And what are some of the effects of poor nutrition and malnourishment? Well, physical. So again, these muscles in various parts of your body are going to be functioning with calcium, different types of vitamins, proteins to a certain level. And again, if a person's malnourished, perhaps they're not taking in the right types of food groups that are going to aid them and help them. There'll be a good correlation between poor nutrition and delayed wound healing. So again, people might have a variety of different types of wounds based on what type of surgery they've had. And again, if they're malnourished, there'll be an increased risk of their wounds either breaking down, not healing up, or dehiscing and opening up as part of the healing process. And again, you will come into contact with people in those situations. And before, there'll be an increased risk of infections. So there'll be a strong correlation between infections. So lots of these food groups will be helping with our immunity and feeding our immunity, in which case if someone is malnourished, they might be at a higher risk of having infections within care settings. And also people's mental health. So again, there'll be a correlation between somebody who's malnourished and having mental health changes and feeling very apathetic, or feeling depressed, or having reduced concentration within their life.
Kevin, someone's asked where you're getting your statistics from. I guess they're the ones that are at the end of the presentation. Yeah.
At the end of the presentation, there'll be some studies that have been done, and again, I think it's fascinating to see that when you look at the data from the 70s, it correlates identically with research that's been done in the last, say, 5 years. Even 40 years ago, the data is very, very similar. And you think, well, there's a whole generation of people gone through the healthcare system there who are people in the same boat as they were, which is amazing, really, considering how high nutrition is on the agenda. Nutrition assessment is obviously a very key and important thing that you're going to get involved in, and hopefully in the various care areas that you're going to be, irrespective if it's going to be you know, an adult environment or a mental health environment. There's going to be scope to assess people's nutritional states. Obviously, the importance would be at a specific point in time. So, generally speaking, in most areas you're going to be working, there'll be a big onus to make sure when a patient enters a care setting, then a nutrition assessment and screen is done to work out at that point in time how that person is regarding whether they're malnourished or not, or whether they're going to become malnourished while they're under your care. Again, by doing this assessment, we can identify these people, and when we do that, we can obviously work out, I have a plan of action about what kind of nutritional support that person's going to need, because that's going to be individual to the person. And obviously part of that also is at different stages we need to evaluate the effectiveness of this support. So hopefully someone's not going to be assessed at a point in time, they'll set a few things in motion, then everyone will forget about that at different points in time, be it on a daily basis or a weekly basis. People will evaluate to make sure actually what we're doing to support the patient is actually beneficial for them and the patient's going in the right direction. So there's a few terms you're going to see that are going to be used sometimes interchangeably. The first part is a nutritional assessment. So again, on the first day in the skills laboratory, one of the areas we had a look at was about making an assessment of a patient when they first came into a healthcare setting and looking at various aspects of the roper's activities of daily living. And one of those will be about eating and drinking. So important to make an assessment of, you know, what someone's dislikes are and what their likes are, and certain types of food they might be allergic to, etc. To make sure we can make a very good assessment of what a patient's normal nutritional requirement is, and obviously set some things in motion to make sure the person has that. And again, the person might have some sort of cultural or religious belief that might mean they don't eat certain types of foods. And again, very important to make sure we identify those people so they're not offended by being offered certain types of foods that isn't part of their intake. As I said, the nutritional screening will be happening in most areas now. There's been a big input over the last 5 or 10 years or so to make sure people are being screened when they come into care areas to make sure we can work out who these people are. This will again be something that you'll practice within the skills laboratory on day 2, but also be something that you will be seeing out there in the care areas where you are. Time for a quick check of the comments or any questions.
Yeah, I've been trying to keep on tagging. I've been sending out responses. Somebody was talking about somebody who's a vegetarian who couldn't actually get the food they wanted. We also have people with special needs like celiac disease, with wheat intolerances and things like that, which are often difficult to get food for. I mean, there are times when you may need to negotiate with families about bringing in food if we can't cater for them, but there are issues around food being brought in by families, and unfortunately one of my patients a few years back had ended up with salmonella poisoning, and her family had brought in some chicken for her to eat, which was most likely cause, and so it is tricky, and it's all to do about things about safety, about reheating, etc. But there's always this risk management, because you may find these sort of slightly like celiac disease, the menu choices are very limited, and therefore there is no reason why you shouldn't discuss supplementing their food, but you have to take into consideration those points about health and hygiene and around cooked food. But certainly people might have their own bread or their own cold food, things that don't need cooking or reheating. That's the main kind of thing.
Jake Tyler, sorry I keep picking on Jake Tyler, but he's made another comment. And the comment was the fact that Derrifa's just opened a Pizza Hut within the hospital grounds. So
yeah, we've been having a McDonald's discussion while you've been talking.
Yeah. So yeah, we're playing a part in trying to suggest healthy food that people would have and good nutrition. Yet it's a bit of a political thing that to presumably gain money for the organisation, that McDonald's or Pizza Huts are being opened up in the foyers of hospitals, and that's
How many of you have you not noticed the advertisement on television by McDonald's where they're bringing a family together because they're providing creche facilities or support facilities in hospitals? Now you think, whilst it sounds really good that McDonald's are doing that and admirable, it is all for to do with their own financial gain, that they're sponsoring a creche or a facility so that families can be brought together in hospital environment.
Lucy's mentioned also about the fact that I'm not picking on Derriford in particular, but Derriford has got a Warren's bakery / pasty shop in the foyer. So presumably, again, people are spending some time down there having, fried breakfasts or pasties at will. Why obviously people on the wards there are presumably trying to educate people about healthy food.
But they talk about with children, sometimes because of the social culture of eating things like McDonald's and the social pressures and the fact that parents do feed their children on that. If a child is sick, they take the premise that maybe it is the only thing that they might want to eat, and therefore they're actually doing them a service by providing that.
Another good comment as well by Alice was saying that you think obesity in children is neglect from the parents. So
yeah, that's a big debate discussion there, isn't it?
A good discussion that obviously Twitter is going to be prime for. So that's an interesting point to make.
The last Adam has made quite a few comments today, but he's talking about funeral companies and drug companies also getting into hospitals and advertising as well. And there you go. Is this the world that we live in? Yeah, James Martin's campaign for better hospital food is a good one. About 15 years or so, another celebrity chef was also determined to change hospital food, and it's very, very interesting. And that was Lloyd Grossman. I couldn't remember his name for a minute. And that is really, really interesting because 15 years ago he had the same campaign as James Martin's having now. Yet 15 years later, James Martin is still having to take up that banner again.
A good point from Rosie about portion sizes and the amount of portions per day. So again, people will think about 5 as being the amount to have, but again, people should be eating much more, and 5 should be thought of as a minimum, not a maximum. Which and Rosie's saying that again, they're in areas she's worked, she's been promoting people to have 7 to 10 portions of fruit and vegetables a day.
I agree with Brian. A lot of hospital canteens are privatised, and so some of the flexibility we might have had in the past is not there. I worked a lot with cystic fibrosis people. They have to eat small meals frequently throughout the day and high protein meals, and all they could provide is things like double cream and stuff like that to add calories and protein. And we used to be sending out for food for our patients because we couldn't get it in hospital, and you kind of think, hospitals should provide that food, or should they? Or should people have the choice to get the food that they want to eat from where they want when they're in hospital?
So, like other important aspects of nursing and healthcare, there is some nice guidelines on nutrition. And again, if you haven't done so already, at some point in time, it'd be useful for you to go onto the nice website and have a look at. Well, it seems out of date, but it's still being utilised at the moment, the 2006 guidelines regarding nutrition. And the key thing for that would be, or the things they say, is the fact that it would be very, very important that nurses play a part in identifying people who are malnourished when they come into healthcare. Because, again, some data here that's a little bit out of date, but again, it's a substantial amount. The £13 billion is being spent on malnutrition-related illness within the healthcare within the UK, so it's a substantial amount of money that's being spent there, which means the fact that again this will cover a lot of the care areas where you're going to be when people are admitted or come through these care areas. It'd be really, really important that you make an assessment of their nutritional state and screen them. So again, it'll be places where it'll be a hospital they've been admitted to. If they come along to an outpatient appointment for the first time, they should be screened. If they enter a care home or residential home, nursing home, when they first register with a GP, and importantly from your point of view also, if the patient gives you any kind of clinical concern about their nutritional intake. So hopefully that'll cover a lot of areas. So it'll be interesting to see when you go out in your placement from January whether the screening of people's malnourishment is high on people's agendas, and that's happening when people are coming into these various care areas. One measure that will be taken when you are screening patients is the body mass index, and it gives you a good indication of what a person's nutritional status is, and it looks at the person's weight and looks at their height in meters squared, in which case you're then given a number, and that number then will relate to the person being a healthy weight, being overweight, being obese, or again being underweight. But there are a few issues about the body mass index. So again, bodybuilders like myself might have quite a high body mass index, but it might be because you're full of muscle. Is a really good indication of that. So body mass index at the moment is a common tool that's being used to try to pinpoint who these people are, but there may be some arguments about the accuracy of a body mass index relating to picking these people up, because people might have a high BMI for the factors that is their build and they're muscular rather than being body fat. In which case, these are the types of charts you're going to see, and then based on what the person's body mass index might be, it then puts them in a certain category. So part of the screening would be to work out if you're catching these people in this underweight area, and if they are, that's a significant finding for you, because obviously that's identifying somebody who's either malnourished or is going to be malnourished while they're under your care, in which case then that will hopefully trigger nurses to do something about that. Again, the other category of people you're commonly going to find is people in the obese category, in which case then be interesting to see in the care areas where you work what the information is or what the guidelines are in order to target these people, because again, we're very interested in these people being underweight, because we know there's lots of evidence to prove the fact that, again, if you're underweight and malnourished, there's a whole range of health issues related to that. But again, everybody will know there's lots of health issues related to obesity, but it'd be very interesting to see from your care areas what actually gets done about this side of things. In some areas that I've worked in, stroked, visited, it would just be something as simple as giving somebody a healthy eating leaflet. But again, hopefully, there's different measures involved to try and tackle these people more or help them with health promotion or education to try to improve their state. Screening tools. So there's many out there, and like anything else, it might be the case that your care area has adapted a screening tool to fit your client group. Hopefully, if they do that, it's going to be backed up with evidence to prove it's a good tool for picking most people up or all people up. There's a national one which people use called the MUST assessment, which again there is some evidence to prove that's a beneficial thing. But again, when someone's done an audit of it, there's about 73 at least different tools out there that people use for nutritional screening, which are being used, which will be important to think about, because some might be much more accurate than others. BAPN. This is a really good website to have a look at. So if you tap BAPN into Google or to Primo, you'll find a really good website there with lots of good information for you. And what it does is it goes through this malnutrition screening tool very, very well. It explains to you exactly how you complete the assessments if you are going to assess somebody when they come into your area, regardless if they're malnourished or not. This will be something we'll practice when you come into day 2 for the clinical skills. But the first stage is that you'll measure someone's height and you'll measure their weight, and by doing that you'll be able to work out what their BMI is, and you'll get a number based on that. Okay. Some patients you can't stand up, so they're bed bound, chair bound, etc. Might be very hard to work out what their height is, in which case then if you have a look in the BAPN website there, they give an explanatory booklet with it. It gives you some good examples about other measurements you could take if you can't work out the patient's height. As an example of that, it'll be things like you measure their ulnar length. So you measure from their wrist up to their elbow, and that gives you a good guesstimation about what their actual height is. Sometimes you can't measure people's weight or their height, in which case then you can make a judgment call on what their BMI is. And one way of doing that would be you could measure around the upper arm, in which case when you've got a measurement around the upper arm, that will give you a guesstimation of what someone's BMI is to fulfill that first part. But you'll get a score for this first bit. The second part is you'll make a good assessment of the patient and work out if there's been any unplanned weight loss over the last 3 to 6 months. Work out what percentage that is of their total weight. And based on if it's 0%, 5%, more than 10%, you'll get a score for that. Also, you look at their acute disease effects. So imagine somebody who's had a rumbling appendix at home, and they've been at home for 3 to 4 days or so, and they've not really been eating and drinking very much, and they get admitted to casualty, and they spend hours in there, and they go to a ward, and then before you know it, 5 days has elapsed, in which case then that's definitely affected their ability to take nutrition in and puts them at risk of nutrition, in which case that person would be scored if 5 days has elapsed and some kind of acute illness has meant they weren't able to eat and drink very well. Once you've done those 3 assessments, you then add those 3 numbers together, and that gives you an overall score for the patient. Based on that score then, the next stage is you plan a care plan for them to work out what you do next. This will be in picture form. So, as I said, BMI score, and you get a number. Weight loss score, and you get a number. Any kind of acute disease that's affected them for 5 days gets a score, and in which case then you put them into categories. They're either going to be at low risk of malnourishment at that point in time or in the future, which would mean the fact that, just for argument's sake, if you're in a hospital, you would just assess that person in a week's time, or if their care changed in some way significantly. But if they're at medium risk, they've scored 1 in some of these categories here, it would mean the fact that you'd have to document what their intake would be for 3 days, and also work out if there's some minor improvements you could make to try and improve their intake. It could be something as simple as helping them to sit up at meal times, or helping them with certain types of cutlery. The important people are going to be people who score 2 or more within these categories here, in which case then it would be very important to not only try to improve their nutritional intake based on making some changes, but also then this will be scope for you to refer the person to a dietitian or a nutritional specialist nurse to come along, because this person might need some added information and education which sometimes we're not able to give, to tailor to their requirements. With
a few people having problems with sound, Kevin.
Are they?
Yeah.
I'll try and shout a bit more. So this is the group of patients that we're very keen to identify and find. But again, this will be the example of how things are with the obesity side of things. So even on this tool here, which is used very widely, if you found out the person was obese based on your assessment up here, the thing would be you'd record that, in which case then sometimes you'd refer the patient for a GP follow-up at some point in time. So it'd be interesting to see what happens about these categories of people, as well as these people who are undernourished. What happens to people that are overnourished, and what gets done about that?
Yeah, somebody's raised that question earlier on. Why aren't we? We're focusing on people who are undernourished. Why aren't we focusing on people who are obese? And there's a lot again being in the press recently about hospitals who refusing to treat or operate on patients who are obese. But then you get the other side of it, where the NICE guidelines recommend that bariatric surgery. Stomach reduction surgery prevents problems in later life, and so obese people should be offered that. It's a bit of a mix at the moment.
That's right. So based on somebody who's undernourished, some of the things that could start happening in the area to try and improve that person's nutritional state could be improving their intake of protein and energy. Okay, so again, it could be the fact that you're improving that, you're giving education on that, or it could be the fact that you're seeking advice from, say, a dietitian, etc., to take for that person's individual needs. So if this person, for instance, is fighting an infection or trying to recover from an operation and they need a higher intake, again, it might be the fact you might need to seek some support to know exactly what types of foods this person might need to have that comes under these categories. As I said, it might just be the fact someone needs some assistance with their eating. So something as simple as helping the person to sit up before their meal arrives. So I guarantee when you go out into the care areas, there'll be somebody lying flat on their back in a bed, and someone's just plonked a plate of food at the end of the bed on a table, and they can smell it, they can almost see it, but they can't do anything about it, and they're reliant on somebody to come along and help them to sit up or sit in the chair, etc. And something as simple as that would suddenly improves that intake massively. Ensuring the food looks good. So a few comments I could see as I was browsing through the comments people are making is the fact that, you know, some of the food that people are saying that are given out in hospitals doesn't look the most appetizing, in which case then it would kind of put people off eating certain foods if it doesn't actually look very nice. And you try to improve people's nutritional intake, and there's, you know, sometimes somebody was saying there's like slops of food on the plate, etc., that don't look very appetizing. So again, a lot of input's been made in the past with Lloyd Grossman. He's cogitated about it, and Jamie Oliver and other people, and there's been millions of pounds spent in the past looking at trying to make hospital food look more attractive, even with garnish, etc., to try and just make sure it looks appetizing for people to have. But again, there's not been very many successes with that, and I presume mainly because it's been made on such a massive level. So presuming some of the small cottage hospitals where people are cooking on the premises, maybe different rules apply. But you know, you can imagine that in a hospital like Derriford, just an example, you've got thousands of meals a day. Presumably, it's not being cooked to everyone's individual taste. Keeping a food chart, so it might seem a little bit out of date, but again, it would be very, very important to make sure that over a period of time we could assess exactly what someone had ate and drank. So there'd be charts at the end of the bed, in which case then, if people are helping people with their food, we chart down exactly how much of certain types of food people have had. Then we've got a good snapshot then, an objective assessment of someone's intake, which could then help other people make assessments of other types of foods the person might have. It could be things as, again, the texture of food, the taste of food, the temperature. So the texture could be that some patients might be coming to hospital and they might require a soft diet. Okay, so their food might have to be liquidized. In which case then, if people are given, you know, pieces of pasty or sausages and things like that that's not the right texture for them, it might be putting people off actually eating. Someone mentioned, I saw in the comments there, about temperature. So again, if the temperature is very, very hot and people are taking in soup, etc., that's scalding their mouth or scalding their lips or their throat, presumably that's going to have a detrimental effect for a few days about what actually people are eating. The portion size also is very important. So imagine lots of hospitals nowadays, people are getting, you know, three meals a day. And I just related to my grandma when she was in hospital, the fact that I know that for breakfast you might have a piece of toast, and then dinner time you might have a bowl of soup and a piece of bread, and some crackers or something for tea. And then, in which case, then I know when she was in hospital, and people were plonking down massive, great fried breakfast or massive meals in front of her, and then she ended up not eating anything because he was just overpowering and didn't want to eat very much. But if we can make good assessments of the patients, know roughly the portion sizes they're going to need, we can influence that with the people who are providing the meals or you know, dishing the meals out. The other thing also would be snacks between meals. This might be where people are going nipping down to Warren's Bakery to get some snacks in between meals, because if their intake needs to be improved, one way is having healthy snacks or energy snacks between meals and nutritional supplements. So there's a whole range of nutritional supplements which we'll show you some examples in the skills laboratory, but you'll also see them out there in practice. So there's different types of drinks you can have, and soups and yogurts and that type of stuff. Lots of different flavours as well that people can have. Hopefully what you're going to see in areas is protected meal times. So in those kind of environments, what we mean by that is for about an hour or so around each meal time, patients, unless there's something catastrophic happens to them, they don't go off the ward to have x-rays and tests. And people don't come along and start taking blood from them, etc. And they have an hour then protected for the patients, and for the staff, to make sure that they can be sat in the chair, they can be sat upright. People might be able then to help them to eat the food, etc. And they get that time to try and just make sure they have a good intake. There's also this, I put read tray system, I think it should be red tray system, the red tray system, whereby what should happen there is, if we are identifying people who are malnourished or need some help with their nutrition, we tell the right people, the hostesses, so that all their food comes out on a red tray, in which case that alerts all the different types of health professionals, primarily nurses, to make sure that we can help those people if they need to. So some of your work is going to be, you know, sitting down with patients at meal times, helping them to eat their food, in which case then they're highlighted by their food being on a red tray. Just make sure that, and also the fact that the hostesses will be aware that before they take the red tray away, that people have actually documented all the food they've had over that period of time.
people are asking things about how meals are left where people can't eat them, need assistance to eat, but they're just dumped at the end of the bed completely out of reach. I've made a comment where people were given sandwiches, but they weren't unwrapped for them, and they didn't have the dexterity to open them. The other thing with food supplements as well is when I was last in practice, quite a few patients were prescribed food supplements 3 times a day, and these are little drinks. They're high calorie and high protein, and so people were drinking those and actually not eating the food but going for the supplements because they were encouraged to drink supplements because they're supposed to be better for your healing and recovery. And then you come to the point where they're coming ready to go home, and you stop the food supplements, but they hadn't eaten any kind of normal food, hardly at all, throughout their stay. And I think supplements are now dished out willy-nilly without a lot of thought, and a lot of thought about how you would wean, and maybe not using the right kind of word, but help people transfer to eating normal, nutritious meal from having supplements. A supplement's a supplement, and it's not a replacement. And I spoke to quite a few of the patients. It was a respiratory ward. I spoke to quite a few people about it, and a lot of them were on the supplements, but not wanting to eat anything in addition. So you've got to think about that, because that, whilst it might help them with their recovery, it's not ultimately the right thing to transfer somebody completely onto that. Yeah, somebody's identified on Taste today that there wasn't enough time to help people eat, and what you need to consider is how should that happen? What should be done? Whose job is it to help people eat? Yeah. John Harris raised the point about people protected meal times not being respected, and people come and take bloods, people come and visit, doctors come and visit, people come in saying it's all right to pop in, people come along taking the X-ray. So whilst we have set protected meal times, a lot of people break those rules, and it is down to the staff and the senior staff to make it, make sure that if that's what you're doing, that's what needs to happen. And to kick the
also the fact
out.
that there's also the fact that when you get a bit more experience and you start to to manage your own patients, the onus will be on you then as well to challenge people and correct people, because you're going to play the part of the patient's advocate, and you'll know from your experience then and your knowledge that nutrition at that point in time is going to be much more essential than going off for an X-ray, which could be done at any point during the day.
A lot of you are talking about examples that you've seen in practice of how people find it very difficult. Somebody's identified that a lady with Parkinson had a special eating aid, and it embarrassed her. When I worked on a stroke ward, they did some research into visiting times, and again, which is topical at the moment, they asked the patients and their relatives about opinions about visiting times, and because people are on stroke ward, they often dribbled food while they were eating because of the nature of their condition. And what was decided as a part of this mini research they did on the ward is that information was given to relatives saying our patients prefer not to have visitors during meal times, so that they can focus on being able to eat. The other thing that people do as well, so there's that about being embarrassed about being seen to eat when they're struggling to eat, but the other thing they found is if you have a visitor come to see you, it's kind of like disrespectful to carry on eating your meal while you had a visitor visiting, and so people wouldn't eat their food because somebody was visiting them, and then it left to get cold. So it was quite an interesting thing they did there, and the reasons why they wanted to say that this was sort of the start of thinking about protected meal times, but they did it based on research, and it was very interesting because it said we have researched this as a team with our patients, and this is the information they gave to all the visitors, that's relatives plus staff, and it was interesting to see how that was very well respected, because we kind of said we have collaboratively looked at this with our patients. A very powerful message went out to doctors, everybody else under the sun. I think that's quite interesting, quite an important thing.
That's right. But it's also, from my experience, people sometimes want to help the patient out and want to be involved in their care, but not quite sure what they can do. So sometimes we just encourage people to come in at meal times and bring a sandwich or a packed lunch and eat at the same time. And sometimes just that being sociable at meal times with a loved one, rather than sit there and
the pair of them
space
eating,
yeah.
Yeah.
sometimes actually it helps that situation, doesn't it, as well? If we do look at obesity, as I said, it's a bit of a minefield, because again, there'll be a lot of argument to show the fact that if we can tackle obesity much more effectively, then we can reduce the complications of obesity. But again, you're going to find, unfortunately, that lots of money is being spent on obesity and the care of people with obesity and the problems they have when they've got obesity. And maybe there's more scope to spend money on education and support them at an earlier point in time. But unfortunately, that's just the way of the political world. An interesting fact is the fact that in the when my parents were young, in the 1940s or 50s or so, most people at that point were either underweight or normal weight. And you're finding nowadays that I'm sure it's over 60% of people in society are now either overweight or obese. So within one kind of generation, we've come full circle from post-war into most people now being in the overweight or obese category. As I said, there is some facts and numbers there to prove the fact that it is costing the NHS and the country substantial amounts. And we know there's complications of obesity, so things like hypertension and high blood pressure, things like infertility, a very strong link with type 2 diabetes, obviously linking that as well with heart disease and increased risk of somebody having a stroke, but also some mental health issues such as depression, and also conditions of the respiratory tract, so like sleep apnea. So that is when people go to sleep and they stop breathing at certain points based on their obesity. And people will die of this annually, as well as these kind of areas. And here's a little trend here just to show what I was mentioning there. So this only goes to 1993, but this comes down here. And again, steadily over that period of time, again with males and females, there's been an increased amount of obesity within a population based on a whole variety of factors. What you will find is when people have nutritional screening, because people are a bit worried about BMIs being very exact or not, that you might find that people might be taking waist circumferences as well as, because there'll be some evidence to show the fact that based on what someone's waist circumference is, that would then increase their risk of having a heart attack or a stroke, etc., and other conditions. So you might find as well as BMI, some places will also be looking at waist circumference, which is another assessment that people might be making. So again, there's some numbers there that go with that as well. So I'm working in inches, I'm afraid, so I'm not so hot with centimeters there. But again, there'll be evidence that will link into this, which will just show the fact that the more abdominal obesity and fat people have, it increases their risk of a whole range of problems for them relating to their cardiovascular status. It's also happening in children. So I think one of the comments earlier on, or there's been a few comments here about people's children, etc., and screening for children in schools, and also nutrition within children as well. But you know, in the southwest, like we have got in the whole UK, there's suddenly people in the southwest, children who have got type 2 diabetes, for instance. So that was unheard of in the UK or worldwide I think it's 1979. There was no children with type 2 diabetes at all. It's totally unheard of. But again, some people have come back to us and said there's some children in the southwest who are 8 years old and 80 kilograms, so, and having diabetes when they're in their teens, etc., which is a startling thing, because it means the fact that they're being exposed to a whole range of health problems from quite an early age. And people have prophesied that, if that continues, it'll mean the fact that those people who are having diabetes or acquiring diabetes, before the age of, say, 10 or 12, are going to start having major health problems when they're 20s and 30s, which means there's going to be a whole population of people coming through who are going to have problems with their eyesight, blindness, amputations, heart attacks, strokes, when they're in their 20s and 30s, rather than historically in their 40s, 50s, 60s, because the effects of things like diabetes at a young age. So it is something on the horizon which you'll be aware of, and you'll be in some of your placements you'll be screening children for. Right. Is there any other little questions or comments there?
There's loads of stuff. I'm trying to keep up with you most of them, and sharing some things, and it's quite interesting. Yes, there probably are some obesity studies and social engagement, I'm sure. There is. A lot of people are talking about, in their experiences, difficulties patients might have had eating, families allowed in. Some of you are saying that you've been in areas where respective mealtime are absolute, which is great to know that. I did ask a question about, are people trained to help people make choices about their eating, and are people trained to help for assisting eating and not just like whipping a tray away because someone's fallen asleep or all those kind of things. And you're right, it is everybody's responsibility in the clinical environment. And if people, some of you are telling me you've been in some areas where patients get what we believe is probably the right thing, support, help in choosing, as also eating, and some don't, and it's good practice to do so. So we've got a lot of food for thought today, a lot of things some of you are raising that some of you have also said that you've noticed that, but certainly your challenges when you go out to placement is to find out more about what we are doing in terms of nutrition support in community and also in hospital as well, and where your nutrition education lies. People don't routinely talk to everybody about nutrition. We might do nutritional screening, we might do BMI, but you don't automatically then necessarily give people advice about healthy lifestyle as part of your care package that you develop for people. Often when somebody's in hospital, it's viewed that your responsibility is about getting them out in hospital to be able to get back into their home environment, but not necessarily prolonged health promotion. And the shift in nurses undertaking activities of health promotion. Kevin was talking about health promotion opportunities when you're giving personal hygiene. Well, there's a lot of health promotion opportunities when you're assisting people with their nutrition or talking to them about going home and continuing. It's been quite interesting. A couple of you picked up that people that are having surgery are given high protein, high calorific drinks before actually having their operation to aid healing, and that's really good to see that. And I'd like to think that that's happening everywhere within surgery. Some of you, obviously, taster days are taster days. Some of you are talking about your taster days. Some of you are talking about your previous healthcare experience. It'd be interesting to see when you've completed your placements for the whole of year one, to look back and see whether some of the things that we've been talking about you've seen good practice or you've challenged it. Saying, well, why aren't patient meal times respected? Why isn't that happening? And students, you're in a great position because you're observing what's going on around you. Sometimes when people come into their work environment, they get on and they just do the work, and they don't necessarily question what people are doing, what's happening, are we doing the right thing. People are doing this more and more, and we're encouraging people to do so. This is what we want to instill in you as nurses of the future, to think about what can we do for best practice.
Matthew made a good point about Pizza Hut does give a free salad bowl, so it's not all bad. So there is some fruit and fibre within Pizza Hut. And somebody else, I've lost the track, but somebody else was saying that a family member was in hospital and they liquidised the breakfast for them and thought they were going to drink, or had almost like a liquidised breakfast, Emma. And again, that would probably be not very appetizing. But what a lot of places are trying to do now is if they do have to make the meals soft and have different consistencies, they just shape the food in the kind of in a model that they were before, like a gingerbread man. So if it's like a meal, they might mash the fish up and blend it down and make it soft, but make it in the form of a fish or like a sausage or peas and things like that, just so that people can actually visualize what it started off as, which then might make it a bit more appetizing. So that is being done in lots of areas to try and just improve the presentation of the food.
There's a lot of talk about having special dining areas for people to go and sit and eat in dining rooms. A lot of you have raised that question, saying that these used to happen, and they don't. This doesn't necessarily happen again. One of the barriers as well about eating is if you're in an open ward area or an open area with other patients, and somebody might have. We raised this with elimination, that people were embarrassed to use a commode or a bedpan with other people in the room. But of course, if somebody's using a bedpan or a commode or something, and people are dining in that area, it's through no fault of any of them, but it's not very nice to sit and try and eat a meal while someone's using the toilet next door, is it? And so dining areas are really, quite important, I think. Somebody's raised a question, Amy Rose, about should we offer help make lunch or dinner if people can't do this themselves? This is an interesting question, and I think it's something you would want to discuss with your district nursing team, because as you know, or you will find out, that you have set time for visiting, and could you include making somebody food? What would happen if you didn't do that? And I think it's something that would be a really interesting discussion point to have, and you will find district nurses will maybe do a bit of shopping for people. It's not within their remit, but they feel if they don't do that, what needs to happen is, if people can't manage to cater to themselves, they need reviewing. They need reviewing for a care package where you can get organised and planned care to come in. Very, very interesting point there. Somebody was saying, what would you do if you're a district nurse and you thought that somebody in a care home wasn't eating well, or they were probably concerned that they weren't getting the nutritional requirement they should have? This needs to be reported on to the manager, and needs to be noted, because if you really wanted to look at it this way, you could say this is elder abuse within a care home and it's neglect. And many district nursing teams, unfortunately, have reported care homes not meeting expected standards. Please don't do this on yourself. Use the district nursing that you work with and talk to them about it, and they do it, and they will do, and it's really important. We are past our time as well, and there's a lot of extra stuff people have popped in on the list there. A couple of things on Twitter. Most of you using this is asking you questions here. Some of you put some things in Twitter, not necessarily about nutrition, apart from the really interesting point is, should overweight, obese nurses be giving nutritional advice? And I might leave you on that point.
Emily's made a good point, asking about what happens if the patient's malnourished in the patient's own home. But again, there'll be lots of services in the community to aid that person as well, and the dietitians, etc., aren't just hospital based. There will be dietitians within the community who will be able to give support and advice as well.
It's about making the referrals on.
As well. Yeah.
We're going to have to leave you. It's been a really interesting discussion with you. We all got a little bit hung up on McDonald's for a while. But that's good, because it's a very interesting debate. I've already downloaded the discussion from the last webinar, so we can post that up, and we're in the process of getting the broadcast loaded up to YouTube. So we are taking another break, and I will be returning at 2. Kevin has to go, unfortunately, so I will apologise in advance that I won't be able to respond so quickly to your questions on my own, but I look forward to having a discussion with you about fluid balance and hydration.
Great, well, thank you very much, and we've recorded the presentation to revisit at a later point in time. Thanks for your comments and your questions.